Well, if you look at and so they say, we talked to 75 of them. Well, you look at the Fortune 1000, right? It's it's a power law. It's very skewed. So just a handful of companies spend almost all the money, and the tail spends very little money. So if you're talking to, company number 200 to 1,000, they're really not moving the needle, whereas companies, 0 through 50 are really the ones that are making it happen. So that's an example of something that sounds superficially quite impressive, but unless you understand the actual contribution to the companies, you're going to get a misread on the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example.
Are you ready to get serious about trading? Then join Tasty Trade, Investorpedia's best platform for options trading in 2026. Stocks, options, futures, and more. Tasty Trade has everything you trade, all in one platform. Get low commissions, including zero commission, and more. Tasty Trade's stellar trade desk team offers live support during trading hours if you need it. Visit or sat on the sidelines because your account balance felt too to big caps, ETFs, limited time to reach the profit target. Show notes to start trading with Trade the Pools.
And I can be very indecisive sometimes, which is quite annoying. How do you suggest people deal with indecisiveness?
Yeah, a lot of that is domain, depends on the domain you're dealing with. And sometimes your indecisiveness is not, it's good, more annoying than, like if you're taking forever to order at a restaurant off the menu or sitting in Starbucks and mulling over the different beverage choices. But, the key question is, do you need to move or not? And, there are little simple techniques on things if you do need to move. A very simple technique that can get you moving a bit is just a plus minus column and just say, right, here's a decision. If I do it, here are the things that are good about it. On the minus column, here are things that are bad about it. And as you enumerate those things, you try to cross off in equal proportion the things that are equal of significance. And whatever you're left with basically says yay or nay, right? So you're forcing yourself to quantify the decision in that fashion. So that might be one way to do that. So, I don't know if there is a great answer to that, but that's one simple technique that tends to get you moving, get you thinking, and get your mental juices flowing so you can get off the fence and do something.
Sure. And are there any other exercises that one can do just in general to improve their decision-making ability?
Yeah, if you especially if you're working in a group setting, almost always the main problem is that people don't surface different alternatives. So to the degree which you have techniques to surface alternatives, that's very effective, especially in group settings. One example of that is a concept called a pre-mortem that was developed by a psychologist named Gary Klein. So we all know about post-mortems, so the patient has died or some adverse outcome, and we try to learn from our mistakes. We give them the information. We think about what we could have or should have done differently. A pre-mortem is actually a quite different exercise. It says, let's pretend we've actually made a decision today, some investment, for instance, and then we launch ourselves into the future, so now it's March of 2018, and we pretend this decision turned out very poorly, very badly. And then each of us individually writes down why that decision didn't work out. And what's interesting is the fact that you put yourself in the future, looking back to the present, and the fact that you've not really made the investment, but you open up your mind in a certain way that allows you to consider and weigh more possibilities than simply projecting out ranges of outcomes. So it's a very interesting little technique that allows people to help their decision making, mostly by making sure their mind stays open. And then the other thing I'll just say, Aaron, which you probably guess I would say this, is that I'm just a big fan of people spending as much time as they can reading and thinking and exposing themselves to different points of view in a thoughtful, rigorous, and tolerant way, because I just think that exposure and that reading and that thinking allow you to be much more judicious as you do have to make specific types of decisions.
As we've been talking about decision making here, and as this is something you've clearly been studying for quite a while now, have you come across any interesting neuroscience studies that kind of back this sort of thing up, which almost get at the reasons why human minds are in many ways flawed for investing? Yeah, actually, we wrote a little report about that, and I thought it was fascinating. We had a summer intern a couple summers ago who was terrific and had the audacity to write on his resume that he was interested in cognitive neuroscience. So we put him to work on that. And
And what we did is we picked a number of the sort of these biases or these psychological issues, and we asked them to find the research for the neural correlates. So I'll give you one example on this, which is a fascinating one. The fancy term for it is hyperbolic discounting. But the concept's a very easy one, right? Which is something like this. If I ask you, for example, if I say, hey, Aaron, would it benefit you to lose a couple pounds? And you go, yeah, I could be a little bit trimmer, maybe. We all think that a little bit. And I go, okay, that's great. So would you like to have dessert today? And you go, sure, I'll start my diet tomorrow, right? So in other words, our future selves are really good, but our present selves are not so good, right? And so if I say, what will your snack be a week from now versus your snack at this moment, people tend to pick the unhealthy snack now and the healthy snack a week from now, right? So there's a formal way we can model all that stuff, but that's the basic idea, is that we want immediate gratification, but we want to be good in the future. So it turns out, this is fascinating, that they put people in fMRI machines as they were making these kinds of decisions. And it turns out that different parts of your brain mediate those. The future are mediated more by your prefrontal cortex, so more of your executive functioning. So it's quite literally those questions get sent to different parts of your brain that how that process could be. There's a series on television I love to watch or what have you. And then you link it to your workout on the treadmill, right? So I'll only listen to you. And then you link it to your workout on the treadmill, right? So I'll only listen to Aaron's podcast when I'm running on the treadmill. So I can't do the fun thing until I'm doing the thing that I need to be doing. So by linking things together like that can be a motivating factor for people.
Okay, that's kind of clever. Cool.
Yeah.
In a talk you gave, you spoke about the brain creating narratives also. Can you speak about this a little more?
Yeah, I find this to be absolutely fascinating. The work that I rely on a lot for this is by a neuroscientist named Michael Gazzaniga, and he's most famous for his work on split brain patients. So these are people that have had debilitating epilepsy, who have failed all their treatments, and really as a last-ditch effort, neurosurgeons go in and section the corpus callosum, so the bundle of nerves between the two hemispheres of the brain, and by the way, I should tell you that people feel better after it, so it helps them. But more importantly, for our discussion, it leads to an amazing experimental condition where scientists can figure out modularity. So what's happening in your left hemisphere and what's happening in your right hemisphere. And to make not a long story short, a longer story shorter, what they found is in the left hemisphere of your brain is a module they call the interpreter. And the job of the interpreter is to link cause and effect. So Aaron, if I throw some outcome at you, some sort of effect, your mind is going to demand some sort of explanation for it, some sort of a cause. It's like an itch that demands to be scratched. And once you come up with that cause, even if it's not particularly good, it closes that loop and the interpreter moves on. And in fact, Gazzaniga wrote a book last year, and it's a very, maybe 2 years ago, it was a very poignant part of the book where he says, basically, this is the feature that distinguishes humans from other species above all else, which is really fascinating. So the point is, we love stories, we love narratives, and I mentioned a few moments ago this idea of the inside-outside view and reliance on base rates and sort of historical performance to guide your future. The problem is, if I give you a statistical answer to something, it comes across as pallid. It's not lively. If I tell you a story, it's vivid. Cause and effect are built into it. It's much, much more salient and much more likely to get you to move. So in our world, even if we have all sorts of statistics and algorithms and numbers, it's still, at the end of the day, it's the stories that move us. And that's really important to recognize, both as a communicator, but also as an ingester of information, that the stories themselves will tend to be more important to you and tend to encourage you to behave more than just a statistical argument.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, if someone wanted to find out more about that, what sort of things could they look up, or is there any resources you might recommend on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I would recommend certainly any work by Michael Gazzaniga. He wrote a book called Tales from, and so I would, if you're interested in that broader topic, I would check that out. And he's written a number of popular articles. So if you don't want to go deeply into it, I think he wrote a very well documented Scientific American article. So if you Google Gazzaniga Scientific American, you could find that, and that's a nice little 4 or 5 page primer to get a sense of what we're talking about.
Before we move off the topic of decision making here, let's just do one more question. So, how can we learn from poor decisions instead of repeating them over and over again?
So, I first had the great honor of meeting Danny Kahneman in the mid-2000s and about a dozen years ago. And that was basically the first question I got to ask him. And his response was, the best way to do this is to keep a journal of your decisions. And it doesn't have to be fancy. So go get a very simple notebook, very simple pen. And when you write down, when you make a decision that's of consequence, write down what you decided, why you decided, what you expect to happen, and put down the date and time. And he said, hey, listen, if you're inclined, write down how you feel physically and emotionally about this decision, and just have that as a repository to go back and audit the quality of your decisions. Because the truth of the matter, you don't do that, we all fall for what's called hindsight bias, which is we start to think we knew what was going to happen with a greater probability than we actually did, right? And something called creeping determinism, which we start to believe the outcomes we see are the only things that could have happened. So you really want to fend off hindsight bias and creeping determinism. And by keeping a log of the quality of your decisions, I think that's the best way to do that. So it requires discipline. It's not hard. It's not expensive. It just requires discipline to do it.
Now, the next subject, which I think flows on quite well from decision making, which I want to speak with you about, is process versus outcome. And I know you briefly mentioned this when we first started talking. When you talk about process being more important than the outcome, why is this the case? Help us understand.
Yeah, so Aaron, I think that the important thing is that that's not true for all domains. There's some domains that are pure skill domains, outcomes are perfectly indicative of what's going on. So, we've mentioned chess before, about a running race, something tennis match. For the most part, those are skill dominant games and the best player wins. And we don't need to worry about so much what was behind that. However, when you get into realms that are probabilistic, where there's a dose of luck in the outcomes, it becomes very important to focus primarily on process and not on outcome. And, I'll give you one example, and I opened one of my books with a story, but a good friend of mine is, a sports executive, and so the dealer looks at the guy and